Hey everybody, welcome to Square Off. I'm Alyssa Lansdale, filling in today for Liz West.
Alyssa, Toronto Maple Leafs goaltender James Reimer came under attack on social media, and some twits went after his wife April as well. Unfortunately, Mrs. Reimer is fair game and should expect harsh criticism. Just try to ignore it and don't hit back.
Offside mark, I say. She was bullied by faceless cowards for no reason. What did she have to do with the way her husband played, I ask you? Why don't they go after the coaches who had a hand in his performance? We're going to discuss this later.
It's very difficult to understand what goes on in the mind of someone who chooses to take their own life. Was suicide the best option? Should we have seen the signs? Could we have done something to prevent it?
No one expects to lose a loved one this way, but every year, approximately 3,500 people in Canada commit suicide. It's the second leading cause of death for young Canadians. So why does this keep happening? Where is the solution, or is there one?
Our next guest is Lynn Keane. She lost her son Daniel to suicide back in 2009 and has written a book titled Give Sorrow Words. It's a book about her family's story. Lynn, thanks for joining us today. Can you take us back to 2009? What happened to your family?
Well, on April 28th, Mark, 2009, we recognized that we'd become survivors of suicide, and it happened on a random Tuesday. My son went up north to our cottage to retrieve some receipts for his summer business, and we never saw him again. But truly, it really started probably his first year away at university, which would have been 3 years prior to that, is really when we started to notice behavioral changes and some physical changes, but very subtle. And, you know, if you look at a young person, particularly a young guy, they're really indistinguishable, their behavioral, you know, their activities, how they are, to just kind of growing up. So we never looked at anything, any one you know, behavioral change, or even the fact that he was starting to lose some weight as symptomatic of someone who is suffering from a catastrophic depression.
Now, Lynn, we all think we know our kids, but after Daniel's death, you did find out a lot of things that you didn't know about him. What kinds of things did you learn? Absolutely.
Well, one of the things I learned, Alyssa, was that Daniel actually counseled a lot of his buddies on, and you know, his roommates and on their problems with their boyfriends. He was the kind of the fixer in a lot of his relationships, and so, you know, we learned that he actually took care of his friends much like he took care of his family. But we also learned that Daniel had stopped going to school, and because of the Privacy Act, we were never notified that he wasn't attending school. And I guess we also learned through hindsight and perspective that he had been drinking for a period of time to self-medicate, to you know, alleviate the malaise and the emotional pain that he was suffering.
Was there any history of mental illness in the family that you found out about after Daniel's death, whereby you, I don't know, it made you feel better that you had done everything you could do as a parent, that you thought you could do, and there was something there that it couldn't have been recognized by anyone?
Right. Well, you know, in our family, I couldn't draw a line and say that there's a link to another family member directly. But to your point, which is a great one, is, you know, survivors of suicide often spend months and years asking why. And unfortunately, we'll never know the whys. But in doing research for the book, I think I started to realize that there would never be one answer. And suicide arises from a complex series of factors, and some of them probably in Daniel's case beginning at a young age. He grew up with childhood chronic health conditions. He had asthma and anaphylaxis. Again, you wouldn't look at that and point your finger to suicide, but what we know now is it can set, you know, childhood adversity can set a person up for adult onset depression. And so I think if the more we educate and understand you know, what are some of the mitigating factors that can set somebody up, or also have them view the world differently, we have a better chance at, you know, producing better outcomes.
Absolutely. Lynn, you know, it's interesting. What I found laudable, and as a parent, I was thrilled to see this, that you didn't feel that shame, that misplaced shame that so many family members of those who have committed suicide feel. You seem to just pour everything into writing. Can you explain that process?
Well, you're right. It was a process. It certainly didn't happen immediately. But what did happen immediately was, once the shock lifted and recognizing that we'd become a family of 5, or now 4, I just had to absorb myself in the grief. And for me, that was the way back to my own ability to live and reconnect with the world. But I immersed myself in the loss, and as painful it was for the rest of my family to watch me sort of live in this pain-filled world as they were living, it was a way for me to start to think about Daniel and look back and sort of peel away his years, his life. And that's when I started writing the book. There was so much information that I was starting to come upon and to recognize and remember and reflect on things that had happened throughout our lives, good and bad things. But I think that was the beginning of acceptance. And in writing our story, sharing our experience, I knew we weren't alone. And, you know, Give Sorrow Words is not certainly a self-help book, but it's a story, and I think it will resonate with anybody who has obviously been touched by suicide, but also anybody that just really wants to read about a family who has faced, you know, severe challenges and trying to find their way through.
Lynn, when someone dies young in a traffic accident from cancer, people's responses usually are, it's terrible, it's horrible. If someone dies from a mental illness, did you find that some people, did you have expectations that some people would look at you and your family differently because you had lost someone to a mental illness as opposed to a car accident or cancer? Can you quantify that?
I can only speak from my experience, Mark. There was you know, people tried to help us in terms of, you know, family and friends. But I think it's there was no language. There's, as you said, if someone dies by cancer, and it's still shocking and it's sad when a young person loses their life. But I think there's a language that we can attach to either comfort the family, you know, or to memorialize and pay tribute to that person. When a person takes their life, there's so much mystery that surrounds that, and I think that that is what we're trying to, with all of these great initiatives, is to peel away that mystery and say, you know, Daniel had a disease. We just have to attach the name disease to depression and to all the mental illnesses to understand that he was unwell. The real tragedy is that we were unable to help him. And I think that was what propelled me to start speaking out and sharing our story quite early on. As Alyssa mentioned, I never felt shame. I just felt complete shock that I could look at this young man who we shared a beautiful relationship and not see what was going on right in front of my eyes.
Does this book give us that language you talk about, you know, in order to deal with it? What does this book offer its readers?
That's a good, I hope it does. I hope the reader can sort of walk with me, you know, to walk in an ordinary family's footsteps and into this terrible place where I used to call our house the house of pain, because you know you think of your home as this wonderful safe place. Well, when we shut the door after the funeral, the energy, the love, everything was just sucked right out of our house, and it was just this pain-filled place. And the 4 of us we were in such grave pain, we were unable to initially help each other. And it's, you know, I think that's what a reader will sort of get in terms of the sort of the grief part of it.
Right.
But in terms of the mental illness and sort of watching Daniel's narrative change from, you know, being this average young guy, I hope that I've done even a small part in reducing the stigma that is attached to this disease, because, you know, they're not well. When we would support anybody and bring compassion to people when they're not well, that's what we need to do with mental illness.
The book is called Give Sorrow Words, and the author is Lynn Keane. Lynn, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for sharing your story and pouring your heart out. We appreciate it, and best of luck with you and your family.
Thank you.
You'll, of course, never forget your son, but hopefully the pain subsides over time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark.
When we come back, you have a prescription for medical marijuana. Do you tell your boss about it? Where do you go to smoke during work hours?
All very good questions. We'll endeavor to find the answers to those and more next on Square Off.